everyone. I'm Geri. I'm lead accessibility specialist at Just Eat. As a visual description of me, if you're listening to this, I am a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair and nerdy black glasses. Today, like all days, I'm wearing what I term as corporate goth. That's a black dress with as many skulls or dead things as I can get away with in a corporate environment. So, as Dave said, I attended State of the Browser back in March. Can you put your hand up if you were also there? Woo! Beautifully curated set of talks available online if you missed out. Here is a photo of the stage in the gorgeous Barbican Theatre. Now picture this. It's the end of a long day and you're sitting in the back row of the conference, mentally processing all the incredible talks you've watched. Your mind is here with an ice-cold post-conference beverage of your choice. Through the mists of your thoughts, you vaguely hear Dave mention he's running an event for Accessibility Week. Then he invites you to speak in front of the whole conference, which is the first time you've heard of this. So a big thank you to Dave for inviting me to speak. Despite being publicly thrown under the bus, I'm delighted to be here. Jokes aside, I'm always keen to talk about accessibility at tech events where it's not always on the agenda, and this week is Accessibility Week, so a lovely opportunity. So let's get started. Everyone likes a story, so sit back and make yourself comfortable. Auntie Geri is going to start this talk with a tale of something that happens to her regularly in her life as an accessibility consultant. The story starts late in the afternoon when I get a message from a team who are just about to release a new feature. It's likely the first time I've seen this feature, which has already been designed and built. The product manager asks, "Geri, is it accessible?" I run through the usual accessibility checks and feedback. "Ooh, there's a problem. The new feature isn't announcing as expected on a screen reader." The beleaguered senior engineer, who incidentally is working across 5 different agile teams, says, "Oh, they'll have to troubleshoot why this is happening. It's potentially a complex rework and they estimate it will take a couple of sprints to fix." Ah! This news completely blindsides the PM, and rightly so. They have a deadline to meet and they haven't factored into additional sprints. Where do they go from here? Do they release something knowing it's not accessible? Oh, that seems wrong and unethical. Or do they tell the business that their shiny new feature is delayed? That makes their team look bad, and everyone's worked hard on this. How does the story end? It ends with everyone hating the accessibility person for ruining their day. The same thing happens with accessibility audits. I call this the accessibility cycle of sadness. We plan, design, build, and QA a new feature. It is released with some fanfare, a Slack announcement, and maybe even a celebratory pizza. The feature gets accessibility tested, often by an external agency. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of accessibility issues get reported. Someone like me with some accessibility knowledge has to pick through all the fails, ticket them, and rank them in priority. Tickets get assigned back to the original feature team, but the team that worked on this feature may no longer exist, and if the team does still exist, they haven't accounted in their planning for all this extra work they have to do. How does this story end? You guessed it. Everyone hates the accessibility person for ruining their life, and we all metaphorically die of dysentery. If we're talking numbers, DeQ estimates it costs $350 to mitigate an accessibility issue in design and development, $450 in QA, but more than $800 per bug that gets through post-release. Ultimately, if someone can't interact successfully online, they're likely to call customer services, which becomes even more expensive long term. The way to avoid falling into this never-ending cycle of sadness is to embrace everyone's favourite LinkedIn keywords. Shift left. If we shift left and sprinkle some accessibility good practices into each stage of our agile workflow, we're less likely to get slapped around the chops with some time sink at the end that we haven't accounted for. So tonight I'm going to cover some simple ideas on how to integrate accessibility into your agile product design process as you plan, design, and build stuff. My loose definition of agile in this talk is you're working on a website, app, or software that is being continuously released, and your team is committed to continuous improvement, be that in increased efficiency or customer experience. I appreciate I've just shat all over 25 years of product management methodology with this 2 bullet point generalization. Fight me in the pub later. Starting with planning. When you're scoping a project, ask questions like, what do we know up front and what are the unknowns that we need to go away and research? If you're fortunate to have some accessibility support like me, pull them into this planning stage to troubleshoot any potential problems. Build in time for accessibility spikes and investigations. When pointing a ticket, these accessibility investigations take time. Have a think through how this might affect people with access needs who use different accessibility settings, assistive tools, and devices. And consider what product and design can front load in the sprints before so engineering can hit the ground running. The teams I've worked in that have done accessibility successfully is where it's been baked into the team culture, and this is reflected in planning. If the PM sets the expectation that this team produces accessible design and code, we build time for accessibility in our pointing, and we have accessibility acceptance criteria, then after a while it just becomes the default and no one questions it. If it's perceived as extra work or something that's done at the end of the sprint, if there's time, then it never happens. If you need help writing accessibility acceptance criteria, there's a brilliant website from Charlie Triplett. It's called Atomically. That's Atomic Alley, A11Y. The site's got sections for design, HTML, iOS, and Android. And if you select what you're working on, it might be like a component or part of a web page. It spits out accessibility acceptance criteria, either as a user story or as a condensed checklist that you can cut and paste and adapt to your requirements. This all sounds peachy, Geri, but won't it slow us down? Yes, it might temporarily slow you down while your team adjusts to some new ways of working, but discovering a critical blocker the day before release or retrospectively fielding 750 accessibility bug tickets post-release will probably slow you down a lot more in the long term. I always say it's not accessibility that slows you down, it's surprise accessibility. So let's move from planning to design. DeQ suggests 67% of accessibility issues start in design. I hate made up statistics like this, but I kind of reluctantly agree with this one. I'm going to talk through 3 aspects of design to consider in a shift left: design foundations, design tooling, and annotating designs for engineering discussion and handover. Starting with foundations, if your foundations nudge you towards accessible choices, then you're more likely to end in accessible outcomes. Most companies, or most tech companies, now have design systems where, as a designer, these foundational choices are already made for you. But if you're making these decisions yourself, put a system into the choices. As an example of creating a system to ensure color contrast, use a tool like Leonardo Color here to generate your color ramps, where you can specify a minimum contrast ratio for each step in your ramp. By specifying ramps with contrast stops, you can create rules around color. In this example, this is a palette I made for a company called BPP. I know I can use white text on background colors 060 and above, and I'll always hit a 4.5:1 contrast ratio in any of my color ramps. The same goes for type and spacing. Get a system into it that will scale. If you need some inspiration, have a look at how some of the big design systems and component libraries do this and adapt it for your organization. From Craig's talk description, it looks like he's going to go into detail about putting some systems into your thinking, maybe. Maybe not on a design level, maybe on a code level. So it's good to build on solid foundations. So moving beyond the foundations to starting to design, to tooling. Design tools shape our outcomes. 80% of the market uses Figma, so my focus is here. Figma's annual conference was last week, and there's some great news. Figma now makes websites. As a designer, you no longer need a pesky engineer or boring stuff like semantic HTML. We're partying like Macromedia in 1999. All you need is divs. Oh, if you inspect the code on Figma's new magical website making tool, there's no headings, no roles. I'm being cheeky. I appreciate this is primarily pitched as a tool for quick prototyping, but this lack of care under the hood just makes me despair. We need to be exposing designers to good practices so they can learn and improve, rather than marinating them in this sort of div inception of slop. As far as I can see, there are still no fields in the Figma interface to specify semantic structure, roles, alt text and labels, focus management and states. I feel like this is such a missed opportunity for designers to learn. So don't assume designers know about accessibility. They need training, and training designers is a key part of your shift left. I guarantee educating your designers will head off at least 67% of your accessibility problems, or your money back. Along with training, little nudges in the right moments are useful. At Just Eat, we have a UX and accessibility review checklist component, which kind of nudges you to consider the basics. Things like check color contrast, add screen reader announcements, check zoom, and increase type size. If you add this to your design systems library as a component, or into your design templates, this is a sort of little nudge that will make designers remember they need to include this detail. This leads to design annotations. Design teams usually have an existing way to annotate designs for engineering. You can use this for accessibility annotations. What can designers annotate? The stuff that's missing from Figma. Heading levels, if it's not obvious from the design. I've got a grab of our Just Eat homepage here with H1 down to H4 annotated with stickers. Reading order, what comes next? If I'm swiping through on a screen reader, what order is the content announced? Focus order, when I tab, what's the next interactive thing that takes focus? And finally, any non-visual stuff like alt text and labels. As a designer, running sessions where I collaboratively marked up files like this with an engineer was how I learned about accessibility. I would highly recommend doing this. If you're looking for some training for designers in a shift left, I highly recommend checking out Stephanie Walter's website. It's at stephaniewalter.design. Stephanie's recorded workshops on annotating designs for accessibility and has loads of useful resources. Ultimately, I have mixed feelings about design tooling and the effort that goes into this engineering handover. by reducing web pages to flat pictures made at fixed resolutions with no interactivity, we're abstracting away all of the good stuff that the web ultimately represents. It's easy to get caught up in these beautiful design artifacts, the complexity of design libraries and these sort of perfectly crafted prototypes, but it's really all just a means to an end, and that end is code. And with that, onwards to shifting left in development. Scott O'Hara recently shared this on Blue Sky and it made me chuckle. He says, "I don't feel joy in having someone realise they need to add alt text. That's like congratulating someone for knowing it's inappropriate to not wear pants in public. Wear pants without a pat on the back, please." While I agree that alt tags, much like pants, are non-negotiable in public, it's easy to assume that everyone knows about accessibility, and that includes engineers. In my experience, the coverage of engineers' accessibility pants varies wildly. I have worked with some senior React engineers which are firmly in the hot pants zone when it comes to HTML. And conversely, I've had junior engineers sashay in wearing a pair of palazzo pants and throw accessibility shade over their older cargo panted peers. Accessibility training for engineers is essential for a shift left to make sure everyone knows the basics. Don't just assume accessibility knowledge because an engineer is senior. If you've got budget, I highly recommend Sarah Soyerden's Practical Accessibility course. I revisit this constantly. It's a really comprehensive resource and it gives you a lovely toolkit and some freebies. As an engineer, if you're looking for an objective towards your annual review, completing training like this can be an excellent measurable. I think the key for a shift left to building accessible products and an agile team is to make sure product and design are front-loading everything you need to set you up for success. The ticket and the designs you're working from need to meet a definition of ready for engineering. To shift left, here are 5 things you need to be supplied as an engineer up front to start work on a ticket. You need to know what happens when you zoom in or increase font size. Does the container grow in height or does the text truncate? You need to know how this will work with no mouse. Keyboard accessibility is fundamental to so many users, and if you constantly test with keyboard as you build stuff, you will cover off most accessibility requirements. You need design to either supply or work with you to step through how a keyboard user will navigate. You need to know what happens when you interact, what takes focus and in what order. You need to be supplied the treatment for all interactive states. What if the user prefers reduced motion? If there's motion in the design you're building from, you need to be supplied a reduced motion version. Finally, how would a screen reader announce this? If you don't know what should announce, you'll either have to guess or you'll have to loop back round to design, who will likely have to go back to the content team which blocks your ticket. If you're not being supplied the accessibility information you need to build stuff, speak to your PM and work with them to spec out a definition of ready for engineering. PMs hate a blocked ticket because it makes those scary looking charts they turn up to retros with look bad. It's ultimately in their charting interest for the sprint to run smoothly. In terms of engineering process, I'm a designer, so I'm not here to tell you how to write your code. We've learned a lot of stuff from Matt, but common sense says you should automate as much as you can to catch the checkbox fails. Integrate accessibility linters into your development environment, run automated testing tools to scan for WCAG violations. Once you're through all the checkbox stuff, the most important bit is to manually test. Here is my quick and dirty checklist when someone asks me, Geri, is it accessible? I make sure all the content makes sense, that I can zoom to 200%, that that I can navigate and perform all actions using keyboard alone, and there's a clear visual focus indicator. I check text has good contrast against the background. And finally, I open it on a screen reader. You all have one on your phone and computer. If you don't know how to use it, just Google it. You only need to learn 4 or 5 commands to cover basic testing. So that was a few simple ideas to help your team shift left and incorporate accessibility best practices earlier in the process. You'll notice all the things I've talked about are straightforward checks that anyone can do. You don't need to be an accessibility specialist who eats the web content accessibility guidelines for breakfast. To truly shift left, we need to make accessibility accessible so it becomes less of a specialist skill and more of a shared responsibility across a whole agile team. As Matt said, terms and tools that you already know. Before I go, I have 2 challenges for you to take away. First is, don't hate your friendly neighbourhood accessibility person. They might come at you citing WCAG criteria or loom large in your Figma file, judging your choices. But at the end of the day, we're in it to make the web a more equitable place for everyone. Involve us early. We will be so delighted to hear from you that we might even bring biscuits. Second challenge is to take one of the ideas I've talked about today and apply it to your own process. This could be a teeny tiny thing like speaking to your PM about including accessibility acceptance criteria on tickets, or building time into planning for an accessibility investigation. It might be including some screen reader annotations on your designs, or upgrading your accessibility pants with some training. Let me know how you get on. You can find me enthusiastically on Blue Sky or reluctantly on LinkedIn. If you want to update me on your progress or just fancy a nerdy chat, I am at Geri Reid. Thank you.